had a bully in your life? Most of us face these bullies in elementary school, sometimes even in high school. The reality is, the bullying doesn't always stop. It may just take a new form. And the question comes up is, when you are getting bullied, or more importantly, when you see someone else getting bullied, what do you do? That's what we're talking about today, is the power of speaking up, not just for yourself, but for those who don't have the power to speak for themselves. We're going to be diving in to what it means to have the courage and to know the importance of doing the right thing and impacting even one life at a time. I'm Clara Capano, and this is Clarity in Action. Welcome to Clarity in Action. This is the show where we have real conversations that are going to challenge your perspectives and drive real action. So if you are tired of holding back and you're ready to make bold moves, this is the show for you. Join us as we are going to take you from confusion into clarity. Well, welcome back to another fantastic episode of Clarity in Action. This one is going to be really fun for me because I have been a huge fan of my next guest, who has been doing some amazing work, especially when it comes into speaking up for those who do not have a voice and helping us to understand the courage that it takes to sometimes dig deep and speak up and advocate for ourselves. So, Matt Murphy, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here.
So, Matt, as a former prosecutor and now as a TV correspondent, one of the things that you do is you do speak up and you highlight a voice for those who do not have a voice. And I would love to ask, what was your moment of clarity where you realized this was the path and the journey that you wanted to go down?
Oh, gosh. There's a great Hemingway quote. I think he was talking about bankruptcy, but he said it happened slowly at first and then all of a sudden. Right. And, for me, it was kind of a process. I had a friend who was a victim of sexual assault when I was in college, and I sort of got a firsthand view of what it's like when you can't get anybody really to do anything, and that was a kind of a formative time in my life. And then I went to law school and stumbled sort of into the DA's office. And I knew at the end of my very first day as a junior law clerk, I'm going to age myself here, but it was summer in 1992 that I wanted to be a DA. And the way it works is you do misdemeanors for a long time. Orange County, at least the way the office used to be run, is they really wanted you to learn how to try cases before you did anything too heavy. So you start out with misdemeanors for a long time. I did a 13-month rotation through juvenile court where you're just going back to back doing juvenile bench trials because there's no juries in juvenile. And then you go to what's called the felony panel. And that I had 37 misdemeanor jury trials under my belt at that point, and probably 100 at least juvenile bench trials. And what you do is you do generic felonies, and then you go to what's called a vertical unit. And I went to sexual assault off the felony panel, and that's really where I first encountered. Really, as a systematic everyday sort of thing, that victim without a voice thing, because about 85% of the cases you handle in sexual assault are sexual abuse of children. So even though they can talk, it's a very different level of being able to explain and to articulate and persuade about what happened to them. And from there, I spent a little shy of 4 years in sexual assault. Then I went to homicide. And that is really where your victims have no voice because they're all dead. And that becomes, you meet the families, and as vertical means you follow the case all the way up. So it's a little different than the traditional sort of standard model for prosecution agencies. Is the police investigate, their investigation's done, they put reports on your desk. One DA reviews it for filing, another DA goes to court with it for the arraignment, another DA handles it at the preliminary hearing, and all the way down the line, and somewhere way down the line, it winds up on the desk of the attorney that's going to actually try it. That's the way we did it in the felony panel. That's the way we did it in misdemeanors. But when it comes to those really important cases, not that the others aren't important, but those ones like homicide or sexual assault, the philosophy of that was they wanted to have DAs that would have a working relationship with the departments. And, think about Southern California, it's all a patchwork of smaller cities. Like LA is, I don't know how many dozens and dozens of smaller cities. A lot of them have their own police department. And Orange County is the same. So, and again, I don't know what the count is, but so while I was in homicide, I had the cities of Newport Beach, Costa Mesa, Laguna Beach, and Irvine. So I was responsible for every one of their murders. And what would happen is, I'd get the call in the middle of the night. I'd go to the crime scene to help with warrants, to help the detectives. So you're literally there the night. I don't know why it always happened at night, but it was almost always at night. Sometimes it was in the day, but you're there from the time essentially right after the crime is committed. And then you'll help them with warrants. You're there to sort of advise. You don't direct the investigation, but you're there to help. And then the lead detective from that night gets paired with you and follow you all the way through court. So at the end of sentencing, or at the day of sentencing, or at least all through the jury trial, the detective that you're with that night working the case is sitting next to you in court. So you really do it kind of as a team. And it's better mousetrap, I think, as they say. And so that's, and look, when you actually go to the scene as a prosecutor and you see the murder victim, and then, too many times, one is almost too many, but you're there when the death notification is given to loved ones. And you see the apoplectic grief. Like I had one, it happened on Thanksgiving. And this woman was murdered in her kitchen/living room. And, she has a screwdriver sticking out of her back and she's dead. And she was cooking Thanksgiving dinner. And her daughter shows up while we're there for Thanksgiving dinner. And, and that's a job I would never, ever want. The police that do those death notifications, that's like working with disabled people, like disabled kids. You need a special kind of soul to be able to do that. But when you see that, one of the first things I would always do is sit down with the victim's family. I would give them my personal cell phone and let them know that there were people that cared. I'd introduce them to my team, my paralegal, who the lead detective was, and try to answer all their questions that I could at that time, and just kind of humanize it a little bit for them, because the criminal justice system can be very indifferent to the victims. And especially, I hate to say it, but in the state of California, seems like it's a little more that way every day. So I always try to make it just a little easier for the families by, letting them know that my team and I were working very hard on their case, and the detectives were good, and everybody was in it for the right reasons. And I think that helped,
Definitely.
at least it helped some. Yeah.
And that sort of leads me to my next question, this role of empathy, because what you are doing is very high level, very emotional. And especially even now being a TV correspondent, you deliver it in a way that's going to be attention grabbing. At the same time, you have to balance that with being humanizing, because these are real people. So how do you navigate the weight of that responsibility?
Your fundamental role as a prosecutor is to do justice. Mm-hmm. And that means you're, in a weird way, you're as obligated to the rights of the defendant as you are your victim. And you've got to make sure that they're treated fairly. And so a lot of that is accomplished by keeping an open mind. You have to keep an open mind. You have to listen to the defense, and you have to be as diligent as you can be. Unfortunately, at that level, it's one of those things where, any mistake that is made can be fatal to the integrity of a conviction. And that's a part of the process. Cases get reversed. And that happens to every prosecutor. And you kick yourself, especially if it's a mistake that you made somewhere along the line. And I'll tell you what, it is stressful as can be. No matter how honest or earnest you are, no matter how hard you work, you always have that specter that the Court of Appeal is going to go, hey, you didn't do this, or you should have done that, or the defense should have found out about this. And next thing you know, you're tarred and feathered, which is a part of the process, which as a prosecutor, you just have to sort of accept, but it's definitely, you have to do the right, thing by everybody, by your victims, by the defendant, and you have to follow the law, to the greatest degree that you possibly can. And again, sometimes mistakes get made, but you've got to earnestly try not to make them. And every case is different. Every case, there's a million different things that can happen. And, so, everybody's human. But that's another thing that you lose a lot of sleep over the years as well. Yeah. And when it comes to the really heavy stuff, like the life sentences, the multiple, sex offenders, the child molesters, but especially the murder cases, and especially the high profile murder cases, those things like we're seeing with Menendez right now, the Menendez brothers, what was that? I think 91 when they tried the second one, or 92. Something like the murder happened in 89, somewhere like
doesn't seem like that long ago, but
early 90s. And if you tune in, there's people excoriating the prosecutor on that. The second guy, David Cohn, who I knew, I had cases with him after he became a defense lawyer. That guy was meticulous. He was an honest, hardworking guy. He passed away over 10 years ago now. But, here he is, after his life is over, and you got guys like my friend Mark Garagos, who I know, and Mark and I go way back, and I like Mark, but he's a showman, and they're throwing David Cohn under the bus to this day, and there may be a new sentencing thing, and so that never really ends. I guess it just sort of goes with the territory, but it's a stressor that nobody really tells you about when you start out.
They really
as
don't.
a DA.
You think it's all done,
right.
And then it can still come back 10, 15, 20 years later.
No, I got to tell you, there are three things that happen on every appeal in California. And I someday this has to change, because it just seems like it gets a little more vehement every year. The judge always gets accused of misinstruction, of not providing the correct instructions, and depriving the defendant of their constitutional rights. The defense lawyer is always accused of what's called IAC, which is ineffective assistance of counsel. And the prosecutor is always accused of the most dastardly tying some woman to the train tracks as you twirl your mustache, skullduggery. And, I was in homicide for 17 years. And I got to tell you, that's the one thing. I left the DA's office 6 years ago. I have a practice where I mostly defending police officers now. But I do a little bit of criminal defense. I do a little civil work, and then I do the media correspondence stuff. And I wrote the book, of course. But I did 52 or 53. I'm blanking right now. Jury trials, while I was in the homicide unit for the 17 years I was there. Every one of them is up on appeal in some form or another, or some habeas thing. And it's like, I just think there's 53 appellate lawyers out there writing briefs, making me look like a villain. And it's just kind of like that part wears on you. I'm still, I don't know. I shouldn't be complaining, but that's
losing sleep over that in between everything else.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So, you have worked on some very high profile, and I followed some of the cases in the book that you wrote, The Book of Murder, which is fantastic, and everyone should go and get it.
Thank you.
Is there a case that you tried that truly tested your belief in the justice system and in the power of speaking up?
Oh, gosh. Well, the Tom and Jackie Hawks case is one that was a big one for me. That was the couple that got murdered off their yacht. That was one that was just incredibly involved. But that was one where the system, at least up to this point, worked very well. I had amazing detectives on that. I had a fantastic trial judge. I had 3 great juries, because we did 3 of those as separate ones. So that's a case where everything went very well. One that really kind of hit me about the criminal justice system was the Samantha Runyon case. That was one of the first cases I got when I was in the unit, because it's this girl that she was 6 years old, and she was kidnapped, raped, and murdered by a man named Alejandro Avila. And Avila had been tried for the sexual abuse of 2 other kids a year or so before in Riverside County, which is adjacent to Orange County. And that was one where it's like I looked at that, and I was fresh out of sexual assault at the time. And I mean, this happens. It's, jury trials are hard, and you never know ultimately who's sitting there because you have very limited information about who your prospective jurors are. And sometimes, cases can go off the rails, and that's one that did, and they acquitted him, and they walked him out the door, even though I'm looking at that case going, how did they manage to F this one up? And fast forward, year and a half after his acquittal, he kidnaps a 6-year-old girl who's playing with a friend outside. Yeah. And then sitting down with her mom, who is, as you can imagine, it's apoplectic grief. And she was such a nice lady. And, it fell on me to try to explain that question. How did the system fail her daughter and fail her? I had no answer that was going to help her in any way. It's like, that's the way the system works. We have juries, there's laws, there's evidence that's included in every case. There's evidence that's excluded in every case. And that was one that really, bothered me. Another one that really bothered me was the Golden State Killer case. That was one of mine. I didn't talk about that in the book because I didn't try it. I retired from the DA's office before that thing came to a head. And eventually he wound up taking a plea and pleading guilty to all the murders. And they eliminated the death penalty. I was the Orange County prosecutor on that for a period of time. And that was one that man was monstrous. And the stuff that he did, and the level of sadism on Joseph DeAngelo was, I mean, among the worst. I can't say it was the worst, but it was among the worst I had seen in my entire career. And that's one that also really disturbs you because he got away with it for so long. And there was a lot of dedicated cops working really hard, but it wasn't until Paul Holes and familial DNA, essentially came about that they were able to track him down using family member DNA that was in the system. So that was one that one is very, very disturbing. And, also I'll tell you the politics working for an office that's an elected official, the DA is elected, that you get a dose of that. It's almost like Icarus, the old Greek guy with the wax wings that flew too close to the sun. The higher the bigger the cases you do, the higher profile they are, the more interaction it seems that you have with the elected DA. And that's always a challenge too, because I worked for a guy named Mike Pizzi first. That's who hired me. And he was a solid guy. And then he left, and there was a guy named Tony Rukakis who came in. He was the DA for about 20 of the years that I was there. And Tony was a good man. He was a former Superior Court judge. He was an alumni from the homicide unit. So he got it. Mm-hmm. He understood. And I enjoyed working for him. But then he was ousted in a contested election. So a whole new administration comes in with different philosophies, and I'm not criticizing them. It's just, it was very different. And for me, it was a good time to kind of go and see what's next. Mm-hmm. And this is what's next, my private practice, and trying to fend off, appellate accusations of misconduct on all my many murders that are up there.
Oh my goodness, crazy. So let's take it into the real world outside of the prosecutor's office. Everybody has moments in their work, regardless of what they do, where they have these moments of, I want to speak up, but I'm afraid of the backlash I might get, or how it's going to be an unpopular opinion. So what have you learned about, courage and resilience, and what advice could you give someone who maybe is afraid to speak up?
So here's the problem for me. I've done that too many times. Mm-hmm. Okay. Like I'm an Irish kid, or at least I was back then. And I was, I got in my first fight with a bully in 4th grade. And I feel like I've been fighting bullies ever since. And, it's a tough thing, because a lot of times there's a very good reason why you don't stand up to the bully, because if the bully's bigger and stronger and more angry, chances are really good the bully is going to beat you, and I mean, and there's that thing that we encounter on the playground does not end. as we know. Like the bully just changes forms. That bully goes from the kid picking fights at recess, and that the bully then turns into, for me, I was in a fraternity in college, and it was a great bunch of guys, but when you're a pledge, you get picked on like the bully keeps changing forms, and then you get a boss who might be mean spirited and isn't treating you well. Sometimes it can be a spouse or a romantic partner or a neighbor that's too like we all know, right? Anybody that's watching this knows that the bully that we encounter in elementary school just changes form as we get older. And being stubborn and Irish and like I've repeated that. There's a kid named Danny Berman, who was the kid that everybody was picking on in elementary school, and he wasn't even really a friend of mine. I mean, I always was nice to Danny Berman. My mom, before she passed away, it was one of her favorite stories. Like I felt sorry for him because he was that kid that got picked on. And I brought him a toy car one day. I have no memory of that at all, but that was like one of her favorite stories to tell. But I don't know what came over me, but he was getting picked on, and I went over and punched the bully. Nice. Never thrown a punch in my life, right in the face, shocked everybody. Wow. And I feel like I've been doing that ever since. And, that time I got away with it, but there's been plenty of other times where I've taken on the bully. And man, I've made my life more difficult, because the bullies more often than not, they do hit back. So I guess it's a very long answer. I'm not advising anybody to run in. But if I could share one story that really kind of inspired me. When I was in college, I had a roommate named Pete Williams, and Pete was a great guy. He was a knucklehead like we all were in college. We were subletting this place in the summer. So I went to UCSB. So we got this place right on the beach, and there's like 10 guys, living there in like 4 rooms. So we had like doubles and triples, and we were subletting until the school year started again. And Pete came home one night, and back then flip-flops were a big thing at UCSB. We all wore flip-flops. He comes in and his feet are just trashed. He's all messed up. He's got bruises on his face. His clothes are torn. He's clearly been in a fight. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, dude, what happened to you? And he's like, man, I was walking down Del Playa, which is the street along the beach at UCSB. He's like, and I see my roommate from freshman year. This is like 3.5 years later. And it was the same sort of thing. He's like, didn't even like the guy, but he's getting beat up by like 4 guys. So, I had to go in there, and that was his thing. So, I had to. It was like, it wasn't a great moral dilemma that he went through. He literally just ran in and wound up getting beat up. Yeah. But it was the right thing to do. And even back then, I remember looking at him, and for a guy that, he always used to steal my clothes. So for a guy, he's a judge now, by the way. He's a 20-year-old knucklehead, and as I was, maybe we were 21 then, and I just remember thinking, wow, it's not even that he did it; he was so casual about it because the right thing appeared to him, and he ran into that. And I've never told him that, but that served as an inspiration to me. Yeah. It's like one of those situations. What was happening was wrong, and he had no chance of winning that fight, but it was wrong. And he went in and he ran into the fight, and he got tuned up. He basically joined his old roommate, who he didn't even particularly like, in a beating. But at least it turned on, it went from a 4-on-1 to a 4-on-2. Mm-hmm. And I've always really kind of admired that. But I've gotten, over the years, metaphorically anyway, I've gotten my face beat up and trashed, and it's hard. It's a hard decision to make, and I can't blame anybody who doesn't run into that fight. For better or worse, I have always been that guy like Pete who has run into the fight, and I have not always won. And I got plenty of those happening right now. I have a case in Los Angeles that I also share, involving a police officer who has been charged with a homicide that he absolutely did not commit. He committed the homicide. It was a shooting of a gang member who had a gun in his lap. It looked like a sawed-off shotgun. Later, it turned out to be a pellet gun, and that's one where I've had to take on another elected official, a guy named George Gascon, who's recently voted out of office in LA. And that thing has consumed about half of my caseload, working as a lawyer. But again, it's sort of and it was a snake pit, and I ran into it again. It's that metaphor, and I'm not trying to lionize myself here. I'm trying to say, for your people that are hesitating, there's a good reason why you're hesitating a lot of times.
Yeah. But I love that idea of really just going back to it's the right thing to do. And, we have to sometimes weigh that and realize that the mess that's going to come from it might be worth it in the big picture.
Yeah. And I can tell you, like, looking back on those, I've regretted the times I haven't run in a lot more than I have the times that I have, and I've made some enemies over the years doing that. I'm sure George Gascon, he's been voted out of office now, but I went after him really hard on that. And that case is still pending. But what he did was wrong. It was politically motivated, in my opinion. My client was originally cleared in 2019. The shooting happened in 2018. And, my guy he's a father. He's got 2 kids. He's got a wife who loves him. He's not a trigger happy cop, and this guy was the guy he, unfortunately had to shoot was high on methamphetamine, documented gang member, sitting in the passenger or in the driver's seat of a stolen car. And he had what looked like a sawed-off shotgun in his lap. And he's so tweaked out, and he reached for it on video. And in my mind, we call those OISs, or officer involved shootings. That's a clean OIS. But, there were a lot of political forces back then, especially summer of 2020, as you recall. And George Gascon rolled in, the former DA of LA, and promised the family and some activist organizations that he was going to pursue charges against my client, and he did. And so, yeah, I've run into that fight. And so part of that as a lawyer is you can make some enemies doing that. I've represented some victims of sexual assault that, against the DA's office, that won me no Christmas cards from the elected DA in that situation. But you look back and sometimes somebody's got to run in. It's like that 4-on-1 of the guy getting beat up. Sometimes somebody's just got to do something, or like Danny Berman getting picked on for the 800th time in 4th grade. So yeah, I tend to run in. I don't recommend it all the time.
No, well, like I said, you gotta pick your battles, as we say. But I love what you said of how you regret the times you didn't versus the ones that you did. And I think just, thinking about that.
Yeah. I mean, in retrospect, when I'll tell you what, when you're taking your lumps, though, it is no fun when you're taking the shots, the ones that you do. So yeah,
so
that's life.
One of the things that I think is also important is, as we're out there doing all these things, especially with, the level of just emotion and weight that the work that you did, what do you do to decompress? What do you do to kind of step away and get yourself grounded so you can come back and fight another day?
About 5 or 6 years ago, I started doing, I've been a scuba diver since I was 12, and I got into shark diving. And that really helps me a ton, because I'll tell you what, when you're underwater with an apex predator that's looking you in the eye, that could literally eat you, that tends to focus all of your thoughts. There's 2 different schools of thought on that. Most of the time when you're underwater, you're 9 feet long if you count your fins, and you're bubbly, and you're the ugliest thing that they've ever seen. And they don't know what you are. And as long as you're not chumming them up and changing their behavior, my experience, most sharks are pretty docile. But I haven't seen an oceanic whitetip yet. They are really aggressive by reputation. But that was a bull shark, that picture. And that's, they also have a fearsome reputation, but not that one. And it was funny, when it swam in, I had a GoPro. I took that photo, and it rubbed its fin against the GoPro. And that was on purpose. So it's almost like it was curious, So that was I do that to decompress. Also, I surf. I got a bunch of buddies that we do these surf trips, different place every year. But I've about the last 25 years, it's this group of my friends that we'll charter boats in Indonesia, and we'll go out for like 10 days and surf different spots there. And we went to the Marshalls last year. So that also really helps when, for me, going surfing has always been a big part of it, trying to achieve some balance.
Yeah. Like you, I California girl, born and raised, and yeah, getting on the ocean, and I'm terrible at surfing, but I love it. And yeah, Indonesia, I did a surf trip to Bali. It was incredible.
Okay. Yeah, there you go. So you know the deal. You've
Yeah.
been.
I'd go today if I could. Leave right.
Yeah, you and me both, believe me.
Oh my goodness. So a couple more questions I have. I appreciate your time so much, and it's just fascinating. In spending your career fighting for justice, what legacy do you hope to leave behind?
Boy, well, there's that, it's a, I don't know if it's a metaphor, it's a little short story, or the little girl walking down the beach with her mom. I've heard different versions of it, but they're walking down the beach and it's low tide. And there are thousands and thousands of starfish. Have you heard this one? Yeah, that have walked up on the beach and they're dying in the sun. And the little girl runs down and picks up a starfish that's still alive and throws it in the water. And her mom says, sweetheart, that was very sweet, but you're not making any difference. All these other starfish are going to die in the sun. And the little girl thinks about it and says, well, it made a pretty big difference to that starfish. Yeah. So, I think the legacy, for me is just one case at a time, trying to help the victims of violent crime. And, I have my McLaughlin case. I just had a birthday that came and went. And I still get cookies every year from the daughters of Bill McLaughlin, wow. And we did everything we could to help that family and get justice against the people that murdered her father. And, again, everything's up on appeal. Who knows what's going to happen with that ultimately. But, I think that's the legacy, is sort of one case at a time, one starfish at a time. There are people out there who, at their worst moment of their lives, had people that cared about them. And that was my team. And that's, I don't have the power as one person to even make a dent in the criminal justice system. But that I think is the legacy that I wanted to leave. And then I wanted to write that book to, give some recognition to all the other people that work so hard behind the scenes. And also it's, I wanted a bit of a tutorial on, what I learned as a prosecutor about how you have to try to be fair to everybody and the importance of that. And, that essentially is, I guess, legacy. You don't really think about that too much. You want to maintain a good reputation, but at the end of the day, you really don't have any control over that. And Franklin Roosevelt had a great quote. He said, all I ask is that I be judged by the quality of my enemies, and as a prosecutor, if you're doing your job right, you make some enemies. Mm-hmm. You do some things that people aren't going to like. And, not least of which are all the people that are in state prison today serving life sentences for the cases I prosecuted them for. And there's no small amount of them. But you also sometimes that means, their counsel are mad at you at the end. There's a million ways to do that in that job. And, I spend doing my media work with ABC and some of the writing the book. And I'm doing a lot of that portion of my practice in life is out here in New York City now. And I've met a whole bunch of lawyers here that are in the finance world that, and they make insane amounts of money. And, also because it's transactional, it just seems it's marvelously, from my perspective, unconfrontational. Nobody's accusing them of misconduct on appeal. There's no appellate justice who is, having a bad day writing an opinion that makes you look horrible. There's no, they go head to head on the things, and then, they resolve whatever the transactional issue is, and then they're on to the next one. And I look at that and it just seems so wonderfully non-confrontational to me, because they don't try cases. They're not those kinds of lawyers, and they make so much money. But I don't think that, I think for me, being a DA was really more of a calling. I think it found me and I found it. And I've always felt like I was supposed to do that. So I had great satisfaction in my career knowing that I worked with wonderful people and that I had that opportunity to do that professionally. And it was a lot of times, like I wrote in the book, a lot of my life was fundamentally out of balance for a lot of that time too, because of, the last death penalty case I did was on a serial killer named Andrew Urdialis, and the trial itself took 6 months. So imagine it's like being in finals for 6 months. 6 months. They put 5 or 6 expert witnesses on that I had to, slam dunk every one of them. Because it was a death penalty case, and they received the highest level of appellate scrutiny, and any of them get through the net and you're screwed, know. And so 6 months on that. And that was just the trial, the prep, and everything else. So it took, I feel like I gave it everything that I had, and for better or worse, So, but hey, it worked out at least somewhat well because I'm talking to you. Right?
Exactly.
So, if I've been doing financial document review here in New York City, I wouldn't, I don't think I could have written a book. I don't think it would have been half as interesting as the one that I did. Right. So, and for anybody who is watching that is interested, it's called The Book of Murder. It's available on Amazon. It's Disney Books, which is cool. Hyperion Avenue was the actual publisher, which is a subsidiary of Disney Books. It's also on Audible. It's good. This is good for my ego. It's got 4.9 stars on the Audible, which is really cool after like 850 ratings. So if you're at all interested in true crime or want to hear more about these stories, that's available for everybody.
Right. And what I love is you actually read it too, which is great.
I narrated it.
And
yeah,
I'm a big proponent of the author narrating their books.
Yeah, I narrated it, and that has that was it was on the bestseller list at Audible for a while in its category, which was again good for my ego.
Yeah.
And so
and we're going to put the link to order the book in the show notes, so all of you follow it, get it. It is truly fantastic, very fascinating. I loved the behind the scenes looks at it, so hopefully there'll be another book coming from you, maybe with even some more. Be great.
I'm working on it. I'm hoping to get another book deal hopefully soon. So next one's going to be about serial killers.
Okay.
So yeah.
Well, my 5-star grading, and I'll be waiting for that one. So.
Okay. Yeah.
I have one last question to ask you, but before I get to that, I just want to again say thank you and how much I honor what you are doing, being there and focusing on the ones that we can speak up on. We're not going to get them all, but the work that you're doing really is powerful. It has impacted lives and has changed the lives for many people. So, thank you for what you're doing and what you're continuing to do.
No, thank you.
The last question I have for you is, on the journey that you've been through, even though I know you're nowhere near done, sitting where you sit today, learning everything you've learned, how do you define success for yourself today?
Success for me, or where I want to go next, is I want to try to get less war, more peace, sleep a little better at night. That's what I'm trying to attain. You can tell I'm in New York because you can probably hear that siren going by. But that's really what success would be for me next is achieving a better sense of peace. And I've been in this fight a long time. I'm not leaving it anytime soon. My practice, I probably have at least 10 more years of the practice of law before I'm done. But I would like to tack more towards peace of mind. So we'll see if I ever get there. Working on it, not succeeding. Yeah, more surfing, more shark diving.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Love it. Well, that's what I wish for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Matt, thank you again. This has been a real honor, a real treat. I can't wait to share everything that you're doing with the world. So thank you for taking time to sit with me today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, that was a true treat for me. I am a true crime junkie, and, I've been a fan of Matt's for many years. So being able to talk to him was really cool. I think so many of the things that he talked about is, he talked about you have to be open-minded. You can't just go in with assumptions, and you have to always be fair. So when you're having these conflicting things and you have to play nice in the sandbox, you want to be fair. At the same time, You have to be willing to speak up, even though it might be uncomfortable. I love the stories that he told about the bullies and how, especially with his friend in college, when he saw his roommate getting beat up, it wasn't even a hesitation. It was, someone's picking on this guy. It's not right. I have to do the right thing. And there are times where standing up and doing the right thing, you're going to get pummeled. You're going to get ridiculed. You're going to make those enemies. And I love what he said is that if you're doing the right thing, if you're doing a good job, you're probably going to make some enemies. So understanding that we have to speak up. Letting these bullies win is not going to get us anywhere. And so when you're out there and you're seeing injustices, be the person who's brave enough. It's not going to be easy. You might make some enemies. You might get beat up a little bit. But at the end of the day, you can look yourself in the mirror and be proud that you had the strength and the courage to do the right thing. So thank you so much. Please, let's make sure that we're sharing these, following these, get Matt's book, and make sure to keep following the show. Thanks for watching. Thanks for following. I'm Clara Capano, and this is Clarity in Action.